I think for beginners, there's this sense of if they don't know how to, speaking of Spanish here, conjugate verbs, then they can't talk. You can't talk to them. Like you can't have this beginning of class conversation because they haven't learned to conjugate verbs yet.
And therefore you need to teach grammar, which is
so
what
you
we
need
hear.
to do that first. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I mostly work with beginners because I just think that's the most interesting. And yeah, you need to be talking to them day one, but it's just like baby talk. Mm-hmm. And then you build from there.
I was going to ask, could you, I think the listeners would love that. Can you walk us through like your day one beginner? Like what's the first 10 minutes of that class look like?
Yeah, so boy, I haven't done this for a really long time, but I would start with like names and some like either or choices just to get people talking. Even if it's something they don't know, with the first kid, if you're like, okay, do you like cats or dogs better? Gatos o perros? And then they say something and the next person says something and you start like comparing them. And yes, you're starting with a lot of either or questions, yes, no questions, and very simple cognates like pizza o hamburguesas. This might not even be a cognate, but you could write it down. So that's usually what I do with trying to learn their names. And then with absolute beginners, if you can do some TPR, good, total physical response, stand up, sit down, raise your hand, like that kind of thing, to be able to get a lot of repetition of things and also for them to just be parsing the sounds of the language and like understanding what the sounds are that are coming at them. So nothing was written down yet. You want to start with oral because written is so much easier to hold on to for adults. And then probably getting into something written using some of the words that we've already done. And then again, asking the either or questions, the yes, no questions to repeat it more and make sure that they understand it. So something like that.
I didn't hear any explanations on whether or not they should be using the subjunctive at that point with beginners.
There's no point.
But what I was going to ask you is, what would you say to a very skeptical teacher or, I would say a skeptical teacher. A lot of the teachers that I know that work with beginners, they have basically, I would say they have told themselves and they believe this firmly that you cannot teach beginners without teaching grammar. So they always say they need something to hold on to. So what would you say to a skeptical teacher who is considering shifting to a more implicit approach to language instruction?
I think the thing that most people can relate to is that with babies, you don't teach them grammar like at all for years, like until they're doing 4 or 10 word sentences. So if you can get that far with babies, then you can do it with students. And as far as something to hold on to, I think a really great thing to hold on to is vocabulary. Mm-hmm. Vocabulary is different from grammar. Like it uses a different memory system. And it's also something that you continue to learn throughout your life. So you never stop learning new words like COVID or texting or social distancing or trying to think of something related to current politics, but I can't. You don't ever lose the ability to learn vocabulary, and it is something that's amenable to studying as well. So I'd say focus more on that if you are in withdrawal from teaching grammar. It's also testable. Do you know the word for this?
Which is probably what but I think it's what a lot of the apps currently do. They focus a lot on teaching users these words, but then they're building sentences that have basically no psychological reality. I remember using Duolingo and I was going to Turkey for work and I was learning sentences that I'm like, I'm never going to say this to anyone in Turkish. Why am I learning how to say the rabbit likes yellow carrots? And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense unless I'm talking to a farmer who has like a rabbit or something. But
yeah.
I wanted to ask you, because you said like it's a very different system. So I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to that. So perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about the difference between the system, what happens in the brain when we learn vocabulary and what happens in the brain when we learn grammar. I think that's something that I would love to hear your thoughts on.
Yeah, I guess vocabulary is part of declarative memory, which sounds like you declare it, like you state it. So the same memory system that knows facts, whereas grammar is in procedural memory. So that is where you store things you can do, tying your shoes, riding a bike. Like you may not really know any facts about these and still be able to do them. So I guess those are some classic examples of how the memory systems are different. It also has to do with why adults can learn vocabulary more easily than grammar, is because that the declarative memory kind of stays, I think, constant across the lifespan, whereas procedural, like you get more of it as you are a developing child, and then when you're older, it like goes down again. So they're different things that the brain does.
I actually heard someone talking about a different type of knowledge, not related to language, but I feel like it, to a certain extent, it could apply to language, which is participatory knowledge, which is very different from the procedural and the declarative. But the participatory is you are actually able to, you have a very close relationship with the situation in that agent arena situation. And I was thinking that in language, very much like in everything that we do, we often tell the same stories multiple times. And I was thinking about like dating, for example. When you go out with someone on a first date, you have that same conversation with every first date you have multiple times. So that would be the participatory knowledge. I think the question then becomes the following, Karen. And I don't know if you have an answer for this, but how can we, in a classroom, design something, perhaps a beginner level course from scratch, based on everything that we know from research? What should we definitely include in this, and what should we definitely leave out when it comes to creating that beginner level course?
I don't recommend creating it entirely from scratch from a logistical perspective, but what should you include? Lots of basic vocabulary, lots of easy reading material, and then you also want to get into easy videos, easy listening, having the students listen to other voices except just the teacher. Even just what I've said so far is already really challenging to do.
Yeah.
And what do you want to leave out? I think anything that you don't know as the teacher, you should leave out. And I say that, but I had to learn new Spanish vocabulary this year. And maybe I'm just being lazy, but I think that if I've never needed to know it in 10 years of being a professor, and then probably another like 12 years of language learning before that, like, I don't think that belongs in fourth semester. I'm sorry. So anything that's too advanced for you as the teacher to know should be out of it. Anything that is a really cool material that students don't understand at all. So a TV show where people speak fast, don't put that on just for cultural exposure. That is not a good use of your time. You need something easier. Try something for toddlers. Even that, like even children's books, like some children's books have weird phrasing. If you think of a song like Row Your Boat, that song is crazy. That makes no sense.
Absolutely. I agree.
Actually, do you guys know the channel Super Simple Songs?
Super Simple
No.
Songs.
Super Simple Songs. Yeah. So it's songs for kids, but it was created by these guys that I think were teaching English to kids in Japan. And they were like, we need songs that are easier. And it's super high quality. It's
4 million
We love
YouTube subscribers. Holy cow.
It's
Yeah.
huge.
Okay.
So yeah, they created songs for teaching kids, and then they realized that kids were watching their videos that were made for teachers, and then they just created the songs for the kids. So yeah, they have songs like "Hello, how are you?" Those songs are easy, and they're repetitive, and they go in long-term memory. And yeah, if anyone's teaching beginners, like even with adults, I love super simple songs.
I was going to ask that because
single
question,
songs.
Leo, we get this question all the time from teachers. Yeah, but where do you find input for That's not too
often the
difficult. That's not
complaint.
demotivating. That's
Yeah.
not too challenging. This is
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
It's funny because my mom was here and she's trying to brush up on her French. And I looked at how she was studying. And she basically had a textbook. And the textbook had just all these grammar explanations in French. And I could see her, she was struggling so much. And I said, Mom, you're never going to learn, you're never going to improve your French if you keep doing this. She's, no, but I have to finish the exercise because I have to send to my teacher. I said, let's go to the library together. And then I took her to the library here. And I took her to the child section and I said, the children's section, and I said to her, pick 2 books here in French that you like, that you think you would enjoy. And she picked one about I think it was about the Incas in Mexico and something about a cat. And
Wow.
believe it or not, she read those 2 books in 3 weeks. She read them over and over again. Then just tell me what happens after those 3 weeks and then we can talk. And she said she enjoyed reading those books and she remembers more from those books than she remembers from doing her French explicit grammar exercises. That, again, she's going to be tested on that, so she has a lot of anxiety about that. But you're absolutely right that reading seems to be extensive reading, which is something, Andrew, that Paul Nation also told us, interviewed him. He said that there was a school in Japan, Kara, where students are just, they pay to go to a class and they just read in silence in class. That's all
Yeah,
they do.
absolutely. It's hard to set aside the time for that as an adult. And if you do it, like, it's going to be so great.
Yeah.
I actually did that as an extra credit assignment for my poor Spanish students with 36 hours of class time, that if they read one of these graded readers out of class and sent me a page about it, they could get extra credit. And a lot of them were like, oh, this was great. This was so much better than the textbook, which maybe they were just trying to get a good grade. But I know for me, when I first found these graded readers for myself learning French or German, I just ate it up. Like, I just couldn't get enough.
I'm here with John from My Speaking Score. And John, I think we agree that as entrepreneurs, one of the toughest things for us is to describe and articulate our business, what we do, why we do it, why we love it, who it helps, what problem it solves, in a super short, crystal clear way that's clear to the audience. So why don't you give us your 20-second pitch of who you help at My Speaking Score?
It's a great question. My Speaking Score is an AI-powered platform that predicts TOEFL speaking scores and gives our users feedback on how specifically to improve their TOEFL speaking performance so they can get a high score on test day.
Incredible. So if you're listening to this, you're a teacher, you help students with TOEFL, help them get their speaking score on TOEFL. Check out myspeakingscore.com. John would love to chat with you about how you can work together to help your students pass their speaking score on the TOEFL test. John, thank you for this.
Thanks, Andrew.
I read them in
funny that
Spanish myself when I was learning
Yeah.
because they were great. It went from trying to read the newspaper, which was impossible, and just forget it, to, oh, I can do this. You want to do it again and again.
And then you do it faster, and then you're picking up all these sentence patterns. And
And it's funny because you enter the field through TPR, or storytelling, which is, if I recall it, I'm not super familiar with TPR. It's not something that I actually studied much, to be honest. And perhaps we can talk a little bit about that, which from my understanding is that input-rich, story-based method. Is that what TPRS is?
Yeah, it's an input-rich, story-based method where the teacher and students make up a story together in this basic, simplified language, and there's a lot of repetitive questioning.
Okay.
So I really just know about the US context. It was developed by a Spanish teacher in the 1990s. And I think to the extent that people know about comprehensible input in the US now, like, it all came from this method. So it's gone beyond this method now. There's not a lot of people doing straight TPRS anymore.
Right.
But it's branched out into a lot of other things that use the same principles as TPRS.
Okay. And what are the main principles then behind TPRS? And the reason I'm asking is because every time I talk to a researcher or someone in the US, everyone seems to be really into TPRS. And for some reason, we don't have much of that here in Canada.
You guys have something called AIM, Accelerated Integrative Method.
Yeah. Would you say it's similar to TPRS or?
It's very similar.
Okay.
AIM is a little bit more like standardized, and TPRS is more grassroots, but both of them involve gestures. Both of them involve stories, retelling stories, simplified language. So they're shockingly similar and they have no connection.
Huh. Why do you think TPRS still resonates with so many teachers? What's the appeal behind it, in your opinion?
I think it was the first method that got students talking and communicating in the target language right away and building community. So a lot of American kids do not care about the samba in Brazil or whatever. Like, they really just want to talk about themselves. And so TPRS created this context that's all in the class, where everything's like inside class jokes and you're making up these stories and you're learning this high frequency stuff. So I think it's a combination of giving students what they want, in this case, like middle schoolers in America, and giving students what they want, communicating in the target language, tons of repetition, high frequency words. And it was just this like magic sauce that got together and just took off.
Okay. Huh. I was doing some research this weekend and reading more about TPRS, and I designed a TPRS lesson, and I'm going to start using it. I want to see if it yields the results that I'm expecting it will. I'm working with a low level, I would say A2 maybe. I think it's an A2 level of students, and I want to see what TPRS feels like. So I'm going to try a lesson this week. But I think my question to you with regards to TPRS, and perhaps we can also touch on the wider spectrum of SLA, because I remember reading on I think it was your website somewhere, that you've been collecting all kinds of empirical studies on TPRS since 2009, I think, and you have probably a long list there. Patterns, Karen, or findings that you notice that have emerged over these last years that you think deserve more attention in the SLA community?
Sure. I have to say the body of research is not fantastic. And what I mean by that is it's a lot of people doing their master's theses, like it's not published in top journals because of this sort of like grassroots quality of the TPRS community and the fact that it came from teachers and not from academics. So part of what I've tried to do is legitimize that research anyway, because even though every study has its flaws, the more studies you look at, you can start to see patterns. So a lot of these studies, and I will say there's not a lot of new ones coming out, and that's probably because the field has just branched out and gone beyond TPRS while using all of its principles, but there's not as much of a focus on it anymore. But yeah, so a lot of the studies will measure students at the beginning and end of a semester and show that they grew in language, which is great, but compared to what? And then there are these studies that compare, usually within the same school, there will be TPRS classes and traditional classes, by which we mean textbook, grammar, vocabulary, thematic units. And usually the TPRS students will test better either on everything. So like the whole entire, say there's a test with speaking, listening, reading, writing, they'll just test better on everything, or they'll test equal on some things and better on other things. And there's also studies that look at motivation. So how anxious do you feel about Spanish class? How motivated are you to learn Spanish? Those don't usually see like amazing differences. But if you look at the research as a whole, it definitely says that there's advantages to TPRS, and there's also nothing that you're missing by doing it. So there's nothing where the traditional students are like, oh yeah, we're so awesome at grammar. Like, the problem is, even though you've taught it, the traditional students didn't learn it anyway because they can't learn it because their proficiency is not there yet. So basically, you are not missing anything if you try this new weird method.
I'm gonna try. I'm gonna do it this week. I'm
super curious.
I'm gonna try. I created and yeah.
If I listen to your podcast episode, whatever's after me, will you talk about it?
I hope so.
Sure.
I hope I will do a
Yeah.
podcast. Maybe I'll do an episode with Andrew where we just both talk
I think
about
we should
our
do that.
experiences with teaching.
Absolutely.
I was very